Mazel tov. Just banged my elbow. So we're in the middle of Vayikra, Leviticus. Amit, do you want a copy? And which is overly, primarily interested in the sacrifices. The Hebrew word for sacrifice there are a few Hebrew words for sacrifice, but the most common one is korban, from the root kuf resh bet. Does anyone know what that root means? To draw near, exactly. So there are other words for sacrifices. Zevach is more focused on the gift, the giving. Ishe Adonai is really much closer to the English word, right? Sacrifice focuses on what you lose, right? You're losing something. Ishe Adonai really draws, I think, more on that. But the most common word is korban, which is from the root word for close, being close or closeness. And so it's focused not on the loss, but on the drawing close to God through what's being given. Hold that in mind for a moment. And the other word I want to hold in mind is the word ratzon, which appears frequently in this Torah portion and the previous Torah portion in reference to the sacrifices, and in rabbinic literature in reference to prayer, from the root resh tzadi he, which means to want or desire. And a ratzon is a desire, a will. And as I said, that word is also often used in conjunction. It doesn't mean sacrifice, but it's often used in conjunction with the concept of sacrifice. So holding those two ideas in mind, closeness and desire, as you know, I like to teach through story. And I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me this week. One evening this week, I needed to be up in San Francisco for an evening event. And I had a rather busy day, so in the afternoon, I had to be down in Los Gatos. It was my day off. I had to be down in Los Gatos for something, and then from Los Gatos, drove straight to Palo Alto to pick up Yara from school, and from Palo Alto, drove to Menlo Park to bring her to physical therapy, and then got back home with about an hour from the time that I thought I needed to leave for San Francisco, and I drive a little electric vehicle. I got home with 20 miles on my vehicle. And not only that, but I hadn't bothered to really check the GPS and take into account traffic, and if I left at the time I had planned to, I was going to be at least half an hour late to my event. All right, plug in the car, run in, make dinner, get things set up, get Yara set up because David wasn't going to be home for a little bit. Go out to the car, and I'm still only at 60 miles on the battery. Okay, but the event was at the JCC. My GPS says 41 miles to get there. All right, 20 miles to spare. That should be great, no problem. Anyone who's been to San Francisco more often than I in an electric vehicle will know that I was forgetting to take something into account, which is that San Francisco is decidedly uphill from Palo Alto. So as I'm driving, I start with a 20-mile leeway, and as I'm getting my leeway is shrinking down to 10 miles, and then 3 miles, and then we get to the point where I am 9.8 miles from the destination, and I've got 9 miles on the battery. And that's about the point. At 9 miles, then it zeroes out and just tells you low battery. It's not making any more commitment about how much you're going to get out of this battery. That happened right when it was time to get off the highway. So here I'm driving through kind of unfamiliar San Francisco neighborhoods, and I'm driving through a park going uphill, and there's a line of cars behind me, and I've got the accelerator pushed down as far as it can, and the speed limit's 35 miles per hour, and I'm not getting more than 25 miles out of this baby. It's like, come on. So as soon as I could, I kind of pulled off to the side of the road. All right, I am not going to make it to my event anywhere close to on time. Pull out my apps. I've got 3 charging apps. None of them are very good to help me find a charger, and I'm not succeeding in finding a charger that I think I can get to. So I call my wonderful husband, who's much better with things like this than I am, and he directs me to a charger. Doesn't work. That's unfortunately not uncommon. Then he directs me to another one, which thank God was downhill from where I was, because at this point I can't get more than 9 miles per hour, even on a flat surface. And I make it to the charging station, which is in the parking lot of a CVS. It's a pretty rundown neighborhood, but lots of people around and feels perfectly safe. There are 3 charging stations. All of them are occupied. Now every charging station has 2 plugs, and it happens that so I'm going to call them station 1, 2, and 3. And station 3, which is at the end of the row, has a CHAdeMO plug. And the CHAdeMO is the one David told me I want. That's the one that's going to charge fastest. So there's no parking space, but I could park illegally there. And then I see that the car that's currently charging is already at 94%. So I get out of my car, and the guy's window is cracked, and I said, "You almost done?" And he said, he had his cell phone on, he said, "I'm on a very personal phone call. It has nothing to do with you." Okay, properly chastised. That was really rude of me. I shouldn't have interrupted his phone call. So I sit there for a while, and he goes maybe from 94 to 95. David explains to me, I kind of knew this, that the first 50% of charge on the battery goes really fast. And then after that, the rate of charging drops exponentially. So once you get above 90, it's just going to take, he said, if you wait for this guy to get to 100, like full, it's going to be at least half an hour, because it's just very slow after 90. So then I thought, well, I'm parked illegally, but I'm here with my car, and there's the CHAdeMO. Why don't I just plug my car in? So I get out and try to do that. Now the guy drops his phone, gets out of his car, and says, "You can't have 2 cars plugged in at once. If you do, you're going to bring down the whole station." Okay, all right. Which I don't think that part is true, but I do think it is true that you can't actually charge 2 at once. So I let it go. And then I kind of go, and he's like 95, maybe not 96 now. So I kind of lean against my car, continue talking to David, hoping that my presence will cause a little pressure on him. And finally, someone pulls out of station 1. So I go over to look, and station 1 and station 2 and the plug that other guy was using are all a format that will not work with my car. So note to self, get that adapter, but I don't have the adapter. So the only one I can use is the CHAdeMO. So at this point, the guy who's parked at station 2, who has a Lyft and Uber sticker on his car, he says to me, "Why don't you use that one?" I said, that charger won't work for me. I don't have that kind of adapter. And he said, "Well, why don't you ask that guy just to move? And then you can," which of course would have been the Menchie thing to do. And it was clear that guy was not going to move. So I go back and stand by my car. And then the guy says to me, "I am going to 100%. And I said, "I understand. I wasn't trying to be obnoxious. I'm sorry I interrupted your phone call. I'm just late for an event, and my car ran out of charge." So then he says something else, but he's in his car. I'm standing outside, but he intentionally drops the level of his voice so I can't hear him. But he's clearly still talking at me. I said, "I can't hear you." And he keeps talking like that, clearly wanting me to strain to try to hear him. So then I just got back in my car and decided there's nothing I can do now. This guy's going to play his power games until he's done. And talked with David for a while, checked my email, managed to, And finally, he gets to 99%. I think he sat there for 10 minutes at 99% before he decided that he wasn't going to get any more of a rise out of me, and he was done with his domination game and time to leave. So, and interestingly, as he pulled out, I saw that he too had a Lyft sticker on his car, so he was also a Lyft driver. And, part of me wanted, what kind of life experiences led this man to want to play these kind of, to take pleasure in having control over another human being. And what interests me much more than how he got to be that way was noticing my own reaction. There have been other times in life, other moments in life, where I've had encounters in which someone wanted to play a domination game, and or moments where I felt violated. And I would imagine, I would take a wager that every woman in this room had that experience, and I would guess quite a few of the men as well. And a very common human reaction, and one that I have had, is to feel shame when that happens. And it doesn't really make logical sense. He should be ashamed for his behavior, but somehow that's, when you are made into the victim, one will feel shame. And what the shame does then is he wanted me to feel small. And if you feel that shame, you do feel small. And then you can pull in and become isolated, especially if that kind of behavior protracts. I mean, this was just he had no real control over me, and I was perfectly safe, and the only control he had was the charger, which eventually he was going to have to let go of. So it was a safe little microcosm of this dynamic. But I didn't feel any of that. What I was able to feel was sort of a bemused detachment and a little bit of pity for this guy. And I know that in the past, I would not have had that bemused detachment. I would have felt those feelings of shame and what made the difference was, I was on the phone with my husband the whole time, who was being very supportive and encouraging me, and oddly, the sort of just warm, normal human decency of that other Lyft driver who really couldn't help me but wanted to help. That connection actually made a huge difference in how I experienced this interchange, or this moment. So where was I heading? Ironically, or coincidentally, the event I was heading to was the gala for Shalom Bayit, the Bay Area's domestic violence prevention, Jewish domestic violence prevention. And I arrived having missed dinner, a little hungry, missed most of the talks, but I came just in time for the last talk, who was a woman who described the way in which her ex-husband had just, what I saw in that parking lot, 10,000-fold over a period of 2 decades of financial and emotional and sexual abuse. Just horrible. And like I said, 10,000-fold over, but I could recognize the same human dynamic here, the desire to dominate. She said he fought for custody over their son, to whom he was physically abusive, not because he had any caring for the son, but just because he wanted to win. But the other thing she shared was that was the way in which Shalom Bayit carried her through that experience, through those years of suffering. And she talked about some practical things Shalom Bayit did for her, but the overwhelming feeling that I got from her was not that the practical help was what was essential, but what was essential was that human connection. That person telling her that you are not a victim. You are a person worthy of dignity. I see you and I care about you. And that feeling of ratzon, that the people at Shalom Bayit wanted her and cared about her, helped her endure and eventually overcome what her husband was bringing on her. So now let's look at the source sheets. I'm bringing you commentaries from two contemporary scholars who lift up two terms that are used in reference to the sacrifices. So on the side that says chilul, let's start with that one. So a chilul is a desecration. And Dr. Tamar, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Kamionkowski, noticed that in the first 16 chapters of Leviticus, that word chilul never appears, but in the beginning of our Torah portion, it appears 10 times within 2 chapters, and then throughout the rest of Leviticus, the word to chilul, to profane, appears. So here it is for the first time in our Torah portion. They shall be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God, for they offer Adonai sacrifices by fire, the bread of their God, and so must be holy. This is referring to the actions of the priests, that they must not behave in a way that causes chilul, to profane, to desecrate the sacrifices. And here's what Dr. Kamionkowski says. Just as Leviticus 19, that was last week's Torah portion, taught that people ought to strive toward holiness, Leviticus 21 teaches that wrongdoing can actually diminish holiness in the world. Right? That behavior that I witnessed that I was subjected to in the parking lot on a microcosm was clearly a diminishment of holiness that I, had it not been for my husband and that other Lyft driver, would have internalized. This new principle is an overlay upon the theology of Leviticus 1 through 16. This perspective teaches that in addition to the ritual impurities that threaten to drive God's presence from the community, our actions in the world and our interactions with other people have a real impact on God's relationship with us. I find a modern analogy useful in understanding this idea. When members of a community are at their best, treating others with respect and fulfilling their obligations, everyone feels the positive energy, and that energy fuels more positive and healthy relationships. When there is dysfunction in a community, when members of the community are not at their best, the energy in the community is depressing. Leviticus understands this dynamic within a religious context, so that generative energy is akin to holiness, and dejection in a community is like desecration. Now let's turn to the other side, this concept of ratzon, right? Dr. Kamionkowski focused on what we don't want and how the community can create a positive energy. That positive energy is called ratzon. And Rabbi Aviva Richman, in one of her commentaries on this Torah portion, brings a rather famous medieval commentary called Kliyakar. The Kliyakar shifts the concept of ratzon. So in the text, ratzon seems to refer to God's feeling towards us, that we bring the sacrifices in order to induce in God a feeling of ratzon, that we want God to desire us, God to look favorably upon us. But the Kliyakar shifts it and says, no, actually the ratzon has to be in us. We are the ones who have to look out at God. And we'll see Rabbi Richman says not just at God, but at each other with a feeling of ratzon, of yes, I see you and I desire you and I lift you up. So let's read the Kliyakar first. Those who only sacrifice when they receive something good, they're, meaning like they're doing it in a kind of transactional way. I'm bringing a sacrifice to thank God for a good crop harvest or to ask God for a good harvest. Theirs is not a gift of desire, of ratzon, but one of obligation for the favors given. Don't do that to Adonai, for you will sacrifice it only according to your ratzon, as if to say that you shouldn't have any coercion causing you to sacrifice, nor should you have any foreign intention. You should only intend it to create joy or pleasure before the Blessed One. And here's what Rabbi Richman says. Our tradition's picture of intimate relationship, whether with God or with another person, requires consent and attentiveness. There is a redemptive power to this kind of intimacy rooted in mutual ratzon. When we cultivate an awareness of our deepest desire, we can access a sense of self, dignity, and responsibility. We become aware of our raw creative power, and this can motivate us towards action. We know what matters most to us, and from this sense of purpose and drive, we feel nourished to do the hard work it takes to actualize our will. If we apply this teaching to how we understand an intimate relationship with God, the point of a religious life is not to negate ourselves, but to cultivate our desire, our true ratzon, and our capacity for expression and action. Being in relationship with God allows us to be attentive to God's will and actualize ourselves simultaneously. This is true for our relationship with God and with others. Intimate relationships rooted in radical ratzon are a reflection of kedusha, holiness, as we make the divine will manifest in ourselves, our communities, and the larger world. May it be a time of ratzon for each of us individually, with our loved ones, those in our closest circle, with our entire community, and between each of us and our community and God. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi Lana Yashkoach, for that beautiful teaching. Before we